Welcome to our backyard. This is the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We are two friends having a discussion after everyone else has passed out or gone to bed. Grab a drink and listen as we discuss everything from automation, space exploration, and why the meaning of life is 42. Today we're going to talk about nuclear waste and where it goes from underground into space into the Simpsons' house. We're going to talk about how to dispose of nuclear waste safely so we don't end up with Godzilla or Death Claws.
How you doing, Nick?
I am doing great, and I'm assuming you are as well. So I think nuclear waste is an important topic that we should talk about because it's a problem that's currently sitting all around the U.S. and there's no real solution, or there's solutions, but no one wants to implement them for various reasons, and we'll figure that out today.
Yeah, you want to talk about sitting. It's going to be, we don't do anything. It's going to be sitting there for quite a long time. For those who don't know, we're going to be talking about radioactive waste, and radioactive waste is a byproduct from a range of different things, including industry and nuclear power plants, but the stuff does not decay fast. In fact, I'm going to throw a little fun fact at you. The half-life of uranium-235 is 700 million years. So if we don't get rid of that, it's just going to sit there and sit there and sit there.
Yeah, so obviously one of the biggest things that people talk about is there's kind of two trains of thought. People either want to bury it, and some people want to throw it into space. Now, I think a quote from Armageddon will call back to a previous episode of, we're sitting on 4 million pounds of fuel, one nuclear weapon, and a thing that has 2,700 moving parts built by the lowest bidder. Makes you feel good, doesn't it? Is the reason we don't really want to send it into space, even though it's a very talked about thing because, we wouldn't have to deal with it on Earth. But until we get space travel nailed down, the thought of all that nuclear waste exploding into the atmosphere is pretty harmful. And people don't like nuclear waste being driven by their house. I doubt they want it flown over it. So one of the things I found is most people think the best idea is to bury it way deep down in the earth. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I was very interesting when I was doing some research on that of the Yukon Mountain. That's 100 miles outside of Las Vegas, and the government of the United States is talking about making it pretty much a sacrificial mountain where people literally just are going to store their nuclear waste for millions upon millions of years. Now, we all need to not have it as spread out as it is, because right now in the United States, it's over dozens of different states, and I actually got a little fact for you. Commercial fuel rods are stored in 76 reactors or storage sites in 34 different states in the United States. I don't like that. I don't like having radioactivity kind of just everywhere. I'll settle for having a sacrificial mountain or burying it underground, but it's not my first choice. My first choice would definitely be to use it, which I hopefully will be talking about a bit later in the podcast. But what's your feeling on it, Nick?
Of whether I want to live by it or not? Personally, no, I'd rather not live by it, but I think it's...
You don't want to turn into the Hulk?
No, I think it's one of those things, though, that, we do have to figure out a place for it to go, and there's a lot of discussion because, well, no one wants to be that place. You have Yucca Mountain, which has been discussed back before our time, was supposed to be the repository, but Nevada at the time hadn't been using nuclear power, and they felt like they were being bullied into storing all this power, all this radiation that they didn't even create, and all the other states just decided it. And it's kind of a huge issue because we don't really know what to do with it, and it's just sitting around, like Mike mentioned, and sooner or later we either got to stop or figure out what to do with it, because we're going to eventually have to store it somewhere. We can't keep it in a temporary storage forever. I think I'd rather have it way deep underground where all that rock is going to protect everything from the radiation. And there's talk of having it so deep down it's beneath any aquifers. So even if it does leak, it's not leaking up into any drinking water.
Well, that's an interesting idea, because I didn't think about the drinking water. Yeah, burying underground to me isn't the best solution, but it's definitely the most feasible solution. I know this problem isn't just for the United States; it's all across the world, and lots of different solutions are being tried, but nothing's really coming through except for, well, burying it. And hell, I don't blame Nevada for not wanting a mountain full of used radioactive material. I mean, I don't think anyone wants that in their backyard. But for those who don't know, because I didn't know this until researching this, that currently nuclear waste is kept in a pool after this is all after it's been used, usually at power plants. So this is the byproduct. So this is they're usually kept in a pool for 5 to 8 years. Water, as we mentioned in our space podcast, go check that out, is great at shielding the radioactive material. And they're kept in the pool until the radioactive material decays to a level where it can be cooled without water. Then they are stored in a thing called casks, which are, I guess I would describe the outside of them as giant silos. And they sit there outside, above ground. And, well, in their defense, they've never had anyone die yet. I think they've had a perfect health record, but something about having nuclear waste above ground in a thing that sort of looks like a silo just seems like a bad idea to me.
Yeah, and that's the thing is these are supposed to be temporary solutions. An interesting fact, we talked about not wanting to live with it. There's a study done in 1998 that said more than 1 in 3 Americans live within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant, which means more than 1 in 3 Americans live within 50 miles of where all that spent fuel is stored. So, we went fishing somewhere in Illinois, and the fishing guide took us to a place where they use the lake water to cool everything. It didn't touch the radiation; it's just cooling, and they bring it back out. But closer to the power plant you went, the bigger the fish got. That's what he said. That's probably due to warm water. The fish they don't need to spend as much energy staying warm, obviously, but I don't think there's no actual radiation in the water. Just a disclaimer.
No, here in the United States, our crackdown on nuclear safety is quite strong. And speaking of growing up near nuclear plants, Nick, me and you, we both grew up in Chicago, and there's quite a few nuclear facilities around that area. I don't know if you happen to knew that, but it is definitely in people's backyards, and they don't realize it.
Yeah, and here's the thing with, like we talked about, like a central location, say either Yucca Mountain or the one in California, is people don't like nuclear waste. They don't like it by them, but they don't like it moved by them either. So it's difficult to transport because no one wants to come near their neighborhood or through their ground. So there's really, we're at an impasse because no one wants to act in whatever way. Part of the problem stems from when nuclear power was getting going, the government said that they would handle all the waste. And so all the nuclear power companies paid the government a certain amount of money in exchange for taking care of the waste. But the government isn't able to figure that out, so they had to pay the nuclear power companies because they defaulted on their agreement. Now, it's not only costing us by just having it sitting out being a hazard potentially, but every taxpayer, even if you don't live within 50 miles of these power plants, has to pay, and your taxes is going to pay those companies. So this problem is just sitting there and getting worse and worse and more expensive as time goes on.
Not even more expensive, but more dangerous. I mean, there's a reason why it's called hot material for a reason. It's because it's giving off gamma radiation. It's a tool not to be played with, definitely to be handled carefully. But besides going underground, I did come across some other methods which I think to be a little bit more promising. Now, to bring back earlier what you said about launching into space versus burying underground, maybe there's a middle ground. I want to bring up a thing called vitrified glass. And I don't know if you came across this, Nick, but they're adding nuclear waste into glass. I think it's, what is it? Boron. Oh, I can't think of the common glass, but they're adding it to glass, and the glass, the vitrified glass, becomes resistant to heat and radiation.
Yeah, I did come across this, and that's because, think about archaeological finds. It's usually glass and pottery. So I as well read that they're trying to turn that material into something like that where it's going to stay intact for long, long periods of time.
Well, to me, it sounds like if we could make, say, aluminum oxide makes clear, strong glass. We could add like a layer of the vitrified glass in between on space stations. We might be able to help protect the astronauts using nuclear waste to protect them from radiation from space. It seems like use radiation to fight radiation almost.
Yeah, I mean, any alternative would be good. I also saw that some people are going to try and turn these spent nuclear pellets into another type of fuel for a different type of fuel consumption by breaking them down into separate components. But I feel like that's mostly just talk, and we haven't really seen too much of it actually played out and applied.
Was that the one with liquid sodium?
Yeah,
Okay, I would be very interested to talk about that because to me that was very interesting because I saw a couple different companies. The main ones that stood out to me were Transatomic and Bill Gates' own TerraPower, which from what I saw for TerraPower was going to go into a small scale operation. I think they did a scaled uh, one, and it was promising enough where they could try to build a plant over in China. Deal fell through, and now they're trying to make that deal in the United States, but it still hasn't come through. To me, it's very promising to use molten sodium instead of water because it'll lower the temperatures and lower the pressures, so we wouldn't have to use enriched uranium. And to me, the enriching process is very dangerous. So anytime we can lower the pressure and lower the heat and not have to make a radioactive material more radioactive is very promising to me.
yeah. I mean, the safer it goes, and that's the thing with any technologies. The more we use it, the better we understand the tool and how to do it safer. So we're kind of still in the beginning phases of nuclear technology, I think, and that's kind of what everyone planned on when they started nuclear technology. They figured we'd come up with a solution, and that's kind of our plan now, is to wait until someone comes with a solution.
Yeah, sticking on to with the using molten sodium. To me, because I did a lot of my studying at university for thermodynamics and power plants, so this was kind of straight up my alley because so for coal, natural gas, and nuclear, they all pretty much use the same methods to produce electricity. They heat water into steam. The steam turns a turbine. Turbine turns magnet, which turns in wires, which then produces electricity. Nuclear tends to be a little bit more efficient and greener out of all of them. But enriching the uranium, to me, is a sketchy process considering, well, I'm not a nuclear engineer, so, but most uranium and platinum that people find out of the ground, and you can buy machines, I'm pretty sure on Amazon, to go search around in the desert to find uranium and platinum, but most of that raw material is too radioactive weak to be used in a plant or facility. So they have to enrich it, usually by sending more, not sure if it's electrons or neutrons at it, to make it more radioactive, and then put in the facility, heat the water, and then the cycle continues. So not having to do that sounds like energy being saved, and having the used pellets be used seems like there's going to be more abundance of materials to be used for nuclear power.
Yeah, and one of the things I ran across is even though everyone wants to get rid of it, they still want to keep the spent pellets close at hand because everyone feels like we're on the verge of being able to recycle them and use them for something else.
Oh, most definitely.
So throwing them down a deep dark hole with no way to get them back, people aren't ready to let them go just yet, but they also don't know what to do with them in the meantime.
Well, I know for some depleted uranium and platinum, we use them as military materials. So since they're so dense for their size, I know like anti-craft rounds and maybe on Navy ships, like pretty much like 40 millimeter rounds and bigger. They have some depleted uranium in them, at least some rounds do, and it just devastates whatever they hit. So I would like to see them not used in a military aspect. Like, don't get me wrong, I love explosions and fire. Me and Nick both absolutely love fire, but all that nuclear waste can't be used for a military industrial complex. So might as well find a new source for it.
Yeah, and I think breaking it down to be using it for power again like we talked about, might be one of the best solutions to figure out how to refine that better, but we're still going to have waste. And even if we break it down further and use more of that pellet, we still have to figure out what to do with that, however much percentage is left, which is the issue.
See, I slightly disagree there. I think we could use the pellets, and what's ever left of the pellets, we could use it to make the vitrified glass, the military rounds, the as we get later into the podcast, the thermal batteries, or mix it with synthetic rock, or do a process called pyroprocessing, do other sources with the waste that's been reduced by recycling the waste.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I feel like that there's the demand for that isn't going to surpass the supply that we're going to have. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's going to take off. It just doesn't seem like it seems like we're kind of just trying to force these extra compounds into rolls just to get rid of them, more so than that there's a demand for those compounds to begin with.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just not blaming nuclear power, because there are nuclear waste that comes from a pretty large range of industries. There's three main types of nuclear waste. There's low level, which is generated from places like industries and forges that they don't usually last too long. They last, I think, like 50 years, if I'm not mistaken.
And that low level, that's 90% of nuclear waste. And even though it's 90% of nuclear waste, it only has 1% of the total percentage of radioactivity of nuclear waste.
Yeah, that's weird to think about, how something that amount could do so little, like at least radioactive wise, like how hot it actually is.
Yeah, and so for what that is, for most low-level waste, it's just lightly contaminated items such as clothing or tools, stuff like that was exposed to it that doesn't actually contain the radioactivity, or it contains a percentage of radioactivity by how close it was, but not the actual metals and stuff like that in it. And then intermediate level waste, which accounts for 7% of the total volume of nuclear waste, that contains 4% of radioactivity from nuclear waste. And that's stuff like the metals and the filters. And then the high level nuclear waste, which just accounts for 3% of volume of waste, but accounts for 95% of radioactivity of waste. And that's those spent fuel pellets that we're talking about.
Just to say where they all kind of come from. Intermediate level usually comes from chemical sludges or metal clanding, and high level usually comes from reactors and bombs, pretty much. So it's everywhere. I mean, I'm willing to bet most of you have a radioactive material in your home, because I would wager that most people eat bananas, and bananas are radioactive technically. And then some people used to use, I think this is back in the 60s and 70s, used to use radioactivity to glow glasses, so they would glow green under UV light, I believe. It was a kind of a fad thing, and you could still collect those glasses. And you'd be surprised on what's in your grandma's house or what's on your kitchen counter might be radioactive, or at least a small amount.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the Radon girls from during World War II, wasn't it? That they had that lipstick that was glow in the dark because of radioactivity. The girls would put it on.
Yep. I'm happy you brought that up. Radioactive material, not just nuclear waste, has fascinated us ever since we've invented it, and we've always thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's unfortunately leaving a lot of crumbs that we don't know what to do with. And going back a little bit to possible solutions, is one I think might be the best solution is batteries. You can use nuclear waste as a quote-unquote small battery. You can make a battery big enough to power the International Space Station with it, which has some strong benefits. You can not only use the battery as electricity, but also produces heat, so your heating ability will increase, so you don't have to use as much heating. And space is cold. Never been there, but from what I read, space is very cold.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, though. I mean, it seems like it's a perfect fit, and you're already protecting yourself against radiation in space, so why not at least get some heat out of that radiation?
Oh, most definitely. For those interested in the batteries, they are called radioisotopic thermoelectric generators, or RTGs. I wish I could speak better, but I'm good at math. That's all I can say.
Yep. Yeah, I just can't speak, and I'm bad at math, so I don't know where that leaves me.
But you can talk to trees.
Yeah, well, trees don't talk, contrary to whatever the fuck that guy's book was. He's an idiot. Anyway,
You're just the Lorax.
The Lorax, a book about trees written on paper.
You'll be the Lorax, and I'll be Mr. Rogers. It'll work out. I meant Mr. Rogers, like not Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but like Lost in Space, kind of Mr. Rogers.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, I'm a sci-fi nerd. I grew up Lost in Space and Stargate and Star Wars and all such and such. But bring it back a little bit. I want to go to an old school kind of process that both the U.S. and Russians attempted, but I've kind of seen to back away because how dangerous it is. Now, all these ideas that we're throwing out aren't just United States based. Like, the whole world is trying to figure out this problem. This is a worldwide problem. Like, I believe France, 70% of all their energy comes from nuclear facilities, so they're kind of a high producer. China is building a lot of nuclear facilities. The entire world is now building nuclear facilities, which, Nick, I hope we get to talk to you a little bit about who is in charge of nuclear waste. But going back to an old school process, a thing called pyroprocessing, which extracts from used fuel a mix of elements instead of just platinum or uranium, and through a process similar to like electroplating, like you have a electrorod, catalyst, an anode, a cathode, using electroplating process pretty much to break down the nuclear waste to something that's non-dangerous. But apparently, the Russia and the United States were just having a lot of problems with that. It was just extremely dangerous, and they just kind of backed away from that. But it's starting to make a comeback because, as Nick said, no one really wants to have nuclear waste go by, fly over, or be right next to their house. So perhaps the solution's an old school solution. Bring back an old school process with some new tools.
Yeah, and, it's looking to the past to get your answers. Never hurt anyone.
Yeah, science, nature gives you your answer, and history tells you how to use it. Well, it is interesting going back to the mountain being right next to your house and stuff like that. I know in Australia, and I believe the United States, they're trying to do synthetic rocks. So trying to bind the nuclear waste with other material to make it less radioactive. Because the big problem is it's going to last a long time unless we use a different process. Because like I said, the half-life is like 700 million years. It is a very long time, and it'll be around for like ever. But if people are trying to combine it into synthetic rocks, like they're trying to bind it now. With, I'm not, like I said, the best with pronouncing scientific words, but perovskite, halidate, and zeolite, which would help reduce the amount of radioactivity, which, if we're going to store it in a mountain, maybe bind it with a synthetic rock or material to make it less radioactive, just so it's a little safer. Because I keep thinking about those casts, how they're stored now. Like, what would happen if a lightning hit? What happened if a tornado went through? I can't imagine the amount of radioactive dust that would be scattered everywhere if a tornado hit one of those.
Yeah, and like we talked about with burying it, the way that these guys looked at it is you don't know what the world is going to look like 100,000 years from now. There probably won't be United States anymore. But that area beneath the ground is going to, 3 miles deep is going to look about the same as it did when you buried it. And so that's why people are looking to go underground, because you don't have that change. But above ground, you have change from nature, like Mike mentioned, tornadoes, you have the natural erosion processes, and you don't know what humans are going to do with it. One of the things that I thought was crazy is they were talking about, when they bury things underground or nuclear waste underground, how to market. Because they were thinking that by the time people came over here, like, the people might not be able to read the languages that we have to say that danger or whatnot. So what do they put that conveys danger across every single culture, or do they just not market at all so that people don't think there's anything there?
I was just about to bring that up. I'm so happy you brought that up. That hurts my brain on how do you mark something that can be universally understood forever. And for those thinking, well, why don't we just write danger in English? The English language that we're speaking right now didn't exist 200 years ago. Like 200 years ago, we were speaking more like Shakespeare's books. And even before that, like we would have to break down. It wasn't for the redstone. We would not have been able to read the hieroglyphs on the Egyptians' pyramids and in ancient Egypt. So it makes you think languages are always adapting, always changing, and what might seem so simple now will be lost throughout history. And I love this puzzle. I have no idea how I would do it. I skull and crossbones keeps coming to my mind, but if I can't see all cultures completely understanding that, or that being 1,000 years from now be understanding, but I didn't come across the point of having it not marked. That is very interesting, Nick. I did not think about that or come across that, and I think that might be the best idea. What's your opinion on it?
For sure, that's what I think is the best, because think about like playing any video game. You come across, like you're playing whatever, you come across plains of nothing, and then all of a sudden there's all these spires and weird shit. What are you going to do? You're going to look around. If you're an alien archaeologist looking around Earth, and you're just in Finland, and it's cold as shit, there's nothing going on, and then all of a sudden there's all these strange spires and markings, what are you going to do? You're going to sit down and start digging, figure out why all this is there, which is exactly what we're trying to not get people to do.
Yeah, maybe the best way is just to be a secret. Just lie and just say, no, there's nothing there. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't give anyone any reasons to think there's loot boxes there.
It'd be like you're gonna have like a Fallout situation all over again. But going back to what you say, I really want to hear your opinion on storing it, because some countries can't store that because they're small countries that don't have the room to store it or have a sacrificial mountain. So maybe we would have them pay us so we would store it for them, or because as the world grows and our power consumptions become much more greedy, we need to keep up with it. So more nuclear plants are being built, which means more nuclear waste, which means we still got to put it somewhere. So a country smaller has to put it somewhere that might not be able to fit it. So how do you feel about other countries transporting their nuclear waste to other countries to store it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for sure we're gonna at some point or another have to designate some area in the United States it's a no-go zone, and that's where we keep all of our nuclear waste. And like we talked about, say you bury it underground beneath the aquifer so there's no water getting into it, that wouldn't be the worst area to coincide with some, desert or something, but maybe there's some invasive species up top or something that, if you're going to need people to stay away, that's maybe the best way to do it, especially if you're not getting any radiation up top. It's just that out of abundance of caution, we're going to stay away from there. Like, if you bury it 3 miles down and you backfill it with dirt and stuff, that radiation is not going to be able to get through. However, once you start having other countries dump their stuff there, you're increasing the amount of volume you have to hide in there. Now, one of the ways I ran across is they just drill these long vertical shafts super far down in the earth, like I mentioned, below the aquifer, and then backfill it so that there's no radiation coming up. Now, you can drill these shafts super deep down, and it's not even new technology. We have shafts that go deeper than 3 miles into the earth, is what they had said, and so it's nothing. The technology isn't new, but the problem is how much do we want to put on our ground, and I think it's a slippery slope, because I would love for us to, if we already designate this area and we have the space, have the U.S. profit off of people dumping their stuff here. And I'd love to have nuclear energy, which is a relatively safe form of energy, and there's drawbacks and pros and cons to every single form of energy. Like, we're not discussing that at all. Like, we get that. But it can supply a large amount of people with power, and I think that's something that we need to encourage, the growth of power distribution across the entire world. But we also don't want to become the world's bitch and have to deal with all their bullshit too, because like we mentioned previously, the US has an excellent safety record for the most part with nuclear power, and they have higher standards than most other countries. So when you start spreading that out across other countries, their standards can slip. They can rise above, they can fall below. It really depends on the country. So I think if we did take other countries' nuclear power, we'd have to be involved in some way with how they handle their nuclear power from start to finish so that we're not getting some really fucked up pieces of, pellets or whatever it is. And that we're not, people are going to look at us and say, well, they did this because the U.S. said that they could do that. We don't want to get blamed for that.
It is very scary to think about because some countries, which I won't name, I kind of feel like they wouldn't operate nuclear facilities to the best, let alone the waste and the byproducts of the nuclear facility. So it makes me very nervous because such a small amount of radioactivity, like a radioactive particle, can do so much damage. And when a country has or corporation has no rules or regulations to handle the waste, I can just see it being dumped and just destroying an entire environment because it just lasts there.
Or worse, someone else gets it who definitely shouldn't have nuclear material.
True. I'm not too worried about that because to make like nuclear bombs, you have to enrich the nuclear. I mean, you could still make a dirty bomb, but dirty bombs aren't that big. And they're not great for missiles. That I'm not too worried about that. It's in the enriching process for uranium and platinum is kind of difficult to do and to make it to an actual bomb. So I'm not too worried about that. But you did make me think of something. I don't know if there's any organism that eats radioactive particles. Like I know sunflower seeds are being used in Chernobyl to help clean the soil, pick up the radiation because the sunflowers do that. But I'm not sure if there's any bacteria, insect, virus, or anything that thrives off radioactive material. I'd be very curious to figure out if there's a organism that we could feed radioactive material to, just so it be like a trash compactor. It just eats it all away and turns it to mulch.
There is, in fact. I am glad you brought that up.
You came across one? Oh, I'm excited. I didn't find one.
Now, it is a bacteria, so that's good and bad. It's good because it's relatively easy to manipulate, but it's bad because it's relatively small. The amount of bacteria that would be required to make the amount of nuclear waste safe or to consume all of it would be pretty incredible. But what I came across is that they use radionuclides in place of oxygen, and so they convert them from a soluble to insoluble forms, making them less mobile. And I believe they were discovered in Chernobyl, is kind of what I remember. But so that's one option, and they also talked about using those bacteria in the space station to like grow them in the walls to as a way to block radiation from coming in.
Biotech, I love it. I am curious though, could we make it so they could survive? So we dig a hole 3 miles down, we drop off our radioactive material, and we just throw in some petri dishes full of bacteria and just close it off. I'm wondering what else do this bacteria needs to have to survive? Does it just need radioactive material? Because if it does, let's just dig a hole, put the nuclear waste in there, and put the bacteria in there and close it off, and they'll kill each other eventually.
Yeah, I don't know, because I know for the most part, when they put the nuclear material into the holes, it's encased in some kind of metal, usually, I want to say copper, that lasts a while. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me. I'm forgetting. It might be copper or brass.
No, I think you're right because you can't use steel because I'll discuss that in a little bit, but I believe you are right.
Okay, and so I don't know if the bacteria will be able to get through that. So you might have to dump just the waste in there or put the bacteria into each container. I'm not sure what else the bacteria needs. Like I said, it uses the radioactive material in place of oxygen. Hopefully it's not photosynthetic. It needs sunlight, or that would put a real damper on that whole situation.
Do you remember what this bacteria is called?
Yeah, hold on. We can look it up, can't we?
All right, well, I'll vent for you a little bit while you find that name because I am super curious and I want to do more research on that. because I really like biotech. I think that's a long-term thinking into the future. But going back to what I was talking about with the steel and the iron, so old decommissioned nuclear plants, they have kind of a problem because even if there's no nuclear material there, there's still nuclear waste because decommissioned plants, they have steel components around or near like the fuel rods, and the fuel rods then make the steel hot, and hot being the term of radioactive. It's like they'll turn steel into like iron 55, cobalt 60, which become highly radioactive and emit gamma rays and can have a half-life of up to 50 years. And if you think about all the facilities that are being built and already have been built, that's 50 years of not, after that closes down, of you can't use that land. So having maybe a bacteria or some other solution to clean that up or turn those highly radioactive materials usable again, or not even usable, just safe to be destroyed, is very beneficial, not only as land but as materials.
Yeah. So I got the name. It is it's called Dionysus radiodurans. It's an extremophiliac bacterium, one of the most radiation-resistant organisms known. It can survive cold, dehydration, vacuum, and acid. So it's listed as the world's toughest bacterium in the Guinness Book of World Records. So that, yeah, I mean, if it can survive vacuum,
well, goddamn,
there you go.
We should definitely put that name up on our Instagram. Check us out at Backyard Philosophy, so the other people can check it out. Because I'm going to be researching that bacteria quite a bit because that is super fascinating me. Water bears, like bacteria, like it just makes so much sense to me that they're going to be there in the future. But speaking of the future, I want to talk about a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Nick, I don't know about you, but unfortunately, I don't keep up who's winning the Nobel Peace Prizes. I really should, and I wish they actually would televise that and be very interesting to watch. But I want to talk about...
Yeah, but have you heard of the Grammys?
Oh, God. Shut your mouth. We were just talking about, before this podcast started, how we're watching all older movies because the new movies aren't our cup of tea. But going back to the Nobel Peace Prize winner, I want to talk about... I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but from what I read about you, I like you. Bernard Moreau. He is currently working, I can't remember if it's in California or France. I think it's France he's currently working with. But he claims to be able to change the lifespan of radioactive waste to cut it down from years and decades down to minutes. And he claims he can do this process by using high-intensity lasers to change up the nucleus, and a process called transmutation. And I heard high power lasers, and I'm just like, fire the lasers. Yes, I'll use lasers to make radioactive material less radioactive. I am down. Now, there are some downsides.
Can we put them on dolphins?
If I was Dr. Evil, I would say yes. I would definitely say yes. But it might have to be a genetically engineered dolphin because these are kind of really big lasers. Now, these lasers, I don't...
Like we always say, the science will get there.
Eventually. These lasers are still kind of theoretical, would be the most powerful lasers ever made, and super expensive to make. Now, France is kind of leading the way because, like I said, they have like 70% of their power coming from nuclear facilities, so nuclear waste is kind of a big concern for them. But even France is like, I don't remember what the exact numbers were, but France was like, that's a lot of money. I don't know if we really want to spend that much money on super big, super powerful lasers.
Yeah, in France, they can't bury their waste because they're closer to the coast. They have more of a fault line running, whereas other areas that don't have as much geologic activity going on, that's going to be a better place. So they really need to figure a different way to store their waste, or have another country store it for them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is, as nuclear power becomes more and more prominent, it's definitely a world collaboration more than a arms race to make the best nuclear facilities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that being said, step up your game, U.S. I don't know why you're letting France beat us. Come on.
I don't know how to explain that either. But maybe I can cheer you up a little bit. Sticking on the same half-life of radioactive material, there are some, I think it was Berkeley, if I remember correctly when I was reading, that they have an idea on how to change the half-life of nuclear waste. And it's kind of a simple process. Well, simple in idea, I imagine extremely annoying and difficult in execution. And that would be simply introducing other atoms to steal electrons. I think it was electrons. Is it electron or neutrons? To steal electrons from the radioactive materials to make their half-life pretty much go down decades. Go from 50 years to 5 days. Simple enough to me. Shoot a bunch of atoms and hopefully steal some electrons or neutrons from the radioactive material. Doing, on the other hand, I have no idea where to start on how to do that. Nick, you're a forester. How would you go about breaking down radioactive material by using other atoms?
I cannot tell you. The only thing my brain thought of was, wow, this sounds like a really high-tech game of Capture the Flag.
Oh, Nick, I love you. I hate you and love you at the same time.
But what would bond with them to take those electrons away?
Well, I imagine the Australians who are using synthetic rock with those materials that I really don't want to pronounce again are binding with them to make them less radioactive. I imagine those molecules shot at the radioactive material. I imagine the radioactivity would probably have to be broken down so it'd be more open and easier to run through. Instead of like a solid rock, it'd be a powder. But I imagine the same molecular structure of the synthetic rock would be used to help grab the electrons or neutrons. Now, it makes a big difference if it's electrons or neutrons. Because if it's neutrons, it's going to need a lot of energy to break that bond up. Because just a little quick science lesson, or not science lesson, science reminder for everyone. An atom is pretty much made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons, neutrons make the nucleus. Electrons float around on the outside. If it's electrons, we just got to make sure it's in the right valence, right level orbit of electrons to grab and snag them. The farther away at the orbit, the easier it is to grab them. So maybe we could energize them a little bit to make their electrons go outward so we can grab them when they're going by there. If they're neutrons, that means they're binded with the protons to make the nucleus, which means we would have to split the nucleus from the protons or just remove a few neutrons to make it the half-life better, which I don't remember off the top of my head how to do. So I'd say now more confidently, they're definitely talking about removing electrons by using other molecules, or it could just be elements. But if I had
Yeah, I would assume electrons. That's where my brain went automatically, but that's because I'm dumb. So
No, you are not dumb, Nick. You are
at or near expectations.
You are a beautiful person. Don't get me wrong. I'm dumb as rocks half the time too. But to me, that's very interesting to cut down the half-life. So could we cut down the half-life of nuclear waste, feed them to the bacteria, or cut down the half-life to make them less radioactive, and then reintroduce them to make batteries, or reintroduce them to make the glass, or use other processes where just safer. Breaking down the half-life to me seems like a very important key to do anything else with radioactive waste.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be your first step. I mean, that's once it gets out of the cooling tanks and cools down, then you break it down, disrupt the half-life, and then after that you could use a combination of other alternatives. You could bury it with the bacteria, you could break it into glass, you could do, it doesn't have to be just one thing, you could do a combination. But once if they found out a way to safely and regularly break the half-life in half, or has turned into a quarter life, and the time it would take it to be a half-life, I mean, that's pretty crazy, and you're bringing that millions of years down into something more feasible that we can deal with.
This might be a little bit off topic and just shooting the shit, but does radioactivity material react with bismuth? I can't recall if it does or not. For those, bismuth is it's a material that people joke that has a half-life so long that people joke, well, what will happen? You see the first half-life of bismuth or the universe will end. Like bismuth has a ridiculous long half-life. And I was wondering if we could store nuclear waste in bismuth, but I don't know how that would react with each other. Like Nick said, we use a copper or brass or a different material because all these radioactive materials mixed together can create some very unique problems for us humans in nature.
I'm kind of confused. So you want to pair radioactive material with bismuth that basically doesn't decay?
Well, if we're going to store it underground and we're going to have to throw it in a container, it seems like that'd be the best container to do it, right?
Right.
A container that won't break down over time, won't patina, won't rust. So if we're going to have to store it in a container, why wouldn't we store it in bismuth? It might not be bismuth. I'm pretty sure it's bismuth.
No, it is bismuth because I was looking it up, Googling. You guys didn't think I was that smart. So, yeah, bismuth has, like Mike mentioned previously, a half-life estimated to be a quarter, more than 1 billion times the estimated age of the universe. So you're pretty safe there. My question is, and this is for you because I have absolutely no idea, how common is bismuth? Is it something that you can work with? Is it viable to make containers to bury, I think we have 65,000 tons of nuclear waste right now? Can we build containers for all that out of bismuth? And what's the cost going to be?
Dude, you can go to you can go to dude. They use bismuth for like stomach relief. You can go to Walmart to get bismuth.
See, that's why I asked you.
Like bismuth, I'm pretty sure is like a super common material, or I believe so. I mean, its atomic number is 83. What's iron? What's iron's atomic number?
Yeah, not going to get that answer from me.
So for those, this is a little off top. It's atomic number 26. So for those, this is kind of way off topic, but pretty much when the universe exploded and expanded, it made up to pretty much just iron. Iron, I think, was like the highest it could make. And then once it started clumping together to form suns and supernovas and planets, etc., that's when we started getting everything above iron. So bismuth is above iron, but I'm pretty sure bismuth is pretty abundant. It's here on Earth. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Couldn't tell you. But all right, we got a little bit off topic. Let's bring it back in. I want to talk about a different method that we could use for breaking down nuclear waste.
Before we continue on, the price of bismuth is between $3 and $14 per pound. So yeah, that's relatively common and inexpensive. I just don't know enough about metalworking to figure out if you can make that into a container.
Is bismuth metal?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Well, you have to do something.
I'm not a chemist.
All right, so we're out of answers. What were you talking about, Mike?
I'm going back to a little bit something I do know a little bit about, which is scientists are experimenting with using depleted uranium as a catalyst to convert ethylene to ethane. So that'd be ethylene with a Y to ethylene with a A. And to me, that sounds like a perfect opportunity to use nuclear waste. So those a little quick what a catalyst is. I'm pretty sure pretty much everyone knows what a catalyst is, but pretty much a catalyst will take a process and lower the amount of energy needed to do such process. I guess is the most simplest way to say it. So having radioactive waste be a catalyst for different chemical reactions sounds like a very promising, because it sounds like a little can go a long way, and it sounds like be able to transform ethylene to ethylene would be a huge stepping stone if we could do that commonly in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that would be important as a catalyst. Like, that's something I never even thought about, bringing in a catalyst to make the reactions better. I don't know why that seems so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, we're only just doing research on it, and hopefully, Nick, we'll eventually make a tree that can eat off nuclear waste so that your industry will survive.
You have my attention.
Okay, keep me on your attention. I would love to do a science experiment in space using radioactive waste as a catalyst in a science experiment in space with the windows being made out of radioactive waste glass with walls made of the bacteria you previously mentioned. I think that would be the most hot experiment. Get it? Radioactive, hot, hot. Oh God, I'm such a nerd.
Please stop. But yeah, that'd be pretty sweet.
I to anyone who's making space rockets and like wants to send people to space, I think me and Nick both extremely volunteer ourselves to do this.
I will be your Huckleberry.
I'll be Wyatt Earp. You can be Doc Holliday. I like that. Oh,
But
go ahead.
and you put water on the backside of those bacteria. You have to figure out you need just the thickness of bacteria to keep them at a level, because the good thing about space is the radiation level is pretty constant, it seems like. So you could get a good enough level of bacteria in there to absorb the amount of radiation and then have a backdrop of something that's left. And when you have all that extra water from all the space mining we're going to do, you just put that as the backdrop to absorb the rest of that radiation.
I like that little shout out. You guys should definitely go check out Mining in Space. A previous recording that we did is definitely worth a listen. But you did make me think of something, especially with the bacteria. I'm very happy you found the bacteria because I couldn't find anything. That might be a good resource to have to clean up a radioactive catastrophe. Like eventually, there will be a plant that breaks down again. You had Chernobyl, you had Fukushima, you'll have other plants break. And instead of having it be hundreds of years of just that land being dangerous, maybe we could airdrop in the bacteria or throw in some plants in there to help clean up the nuclear waste. It's a very good, as Nick likes to say, a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and I think they were looking at doing something similar to that with the bacteria that would consume petroleum products. It didn't put into actual production, but in case of an oil spill, something like that.
I'm a very strong component of biotech, so I would absolutely love to see a response team using bacteria to clean up a radioactive site.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about the bacteria is, it's a relatively simple organism, and once its food source is gone, it's gone. And so they just kind of break down. You collect it. I don't know exactly how that'd work, but it's not like you're releasing a complicated predator or something into the environment that you don't know what it's going to do. I mean, you could run tests and tests and tests. Bacteria, easy to test so they're so small. I mean, it seems like a pretty simple thing to do. And like if we could put that in there, like in Fukushima, get that in there, just flood that bay with it that is leaking all the water into, and just the outside of that bay would be protected. That bacteria consumes all the radiation in the water there while it's still in a somewhat central location. I mean, that's pretty much best case scenario right there.
Oh, yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head in there, Nick. But you also made me think of another component of it.
What?
Perhaps nuclear waste can be used as a weapon. Let me rephrase that. Nuclear waste cleanup can be used as a weapon. The cleanup could be used as a weapon. Because, as pretty much everyone knows, the United States has a nuclear arsenal. And we have silos and et cetera, et cetera. But I'm wondering if country A wanted to remove a nuclear weapon, could they launch that bacteria simply near where the uranium or platinum is being enriched to destroy it? Could it be burning the food so the soldiers can't eat kind of scenario? It makes me wonder if cleanup to me just seems like it's such a good thing. But I'm wondering about the consequences of it being a dual-edged sword, which makes me think a little bit on the negative effects of nuclear cleanup, at least the ways we mentioned. Not excluding burying it under the ground, because burying it underground is pretty much the most neutral thing you can do. What's your opinion of using bacteria to demolish a enemy or an enemy demolishing our nuclear capabilities?
I feel like that's a little bit unrealistic just because of the population of the bacteria that would have to be employed to completely eradicate a nuclear power, especially a power that's constantly being produced. I don't think that's. I think what you're doing at best is consuming the power or the radiation around the, say, pellet or weapon or whatever you're trying to get rid of. But I feel like you're not going to. I don't. I think if the bacteria was going to completely erode or eat, I guess would be the proper term, completely eat the radiation and radiation source, that it would be a bigger problem. But I think more of what it does is that it just consumes the radiation. I don't think it would have to produce in such a large amount that they would be able to detect what's going on before it got to the radiation source, just because they had to build up that population, that they would somehow have to counteract that. But I just can't see bacteria working in such a quick way like that.
That's fair.
Like launching a rocket and then all of a sudden it's gone. Which is why I don't think it's going to be used as like in, say, the U.S. was hit by a nuclear weapon. I don't think there's a stockpile of bacteria ready to just let loose and just absorb all that radiation. I think they'd have to. You could release enough that over time they could get rid of the radiation, but they'd have to build up a large population, or we just have to constantly feed a giant population of radiation-hungry bacteria so that we could deploy whenever. But I feel like then you're, trucking a bunch of bacteria straight into wherever you want to do that, which might make sense in the United States, but it's not something that's going to happen in a foreign country as a weapon.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I was just throwing out a crazy, stupid idea, and I think you're right. Maybe nuclear waste cleanup is not a dual-edged sword. Maybe it's just a simple tool that everyone kind of needs. As we mentioned, and I kind of want to talk about a little bit more, the world is increasing their nuclear capabilities. The numbers rise every year. And not having a regulation for the entire world, or at least having an organization to check in. Like, I know there are currently a third-party world organization that goes in and checks nuclear facilities. But I don't know if they...
But we've also all seen... what's the puppet? Team America, where they go and check for nuclear weapons in North Korea, and we know how that works out.
True. And I'm not sure if the nuclear codes are for running nuclear plants. What about the nuclear waste? That might be something separate, not extended to. It is something to think about. Or imagine a country that is a developing country that, hey, nuclear energy could help bring our country to a new generation or new era. But they go, well, we kind of have to do it dirty. So in order to do it dirty, we're just going to make sure people who come and check it, we just don't allow them to. We just kind of shut our borders. And that's very dangerous to think about, because nuclear waste doesn't just affect the close surrounding areas. It is extremely impactful. So I'm wondering, what would your process... Say you had a magic wand, you were king of the world. What would your be... Wow, that was a weird sentence. What would your solution / method be to help prevent nuclear waste being unethically distributed or stored?
I mean, I think nuclear power is a pretty good source of power. You can generate a lot of power with little land use. Like we talked about, waste is the big issue. I think it's important to take into consideration that nuclear power is one of the only powers that has to take into account their waste and pay for it in full. Whereas like coal-produced power plants or steam, like solar power plants, not as much, but they take up more land. But nuclear power has to pay for the output. Whereas if you're burning coal, you don't have to pay to put that coal in the environment. It just is there. So I think nuclear power is a great tool. Like any tool, it's not the one save-all, be-all tool. It's just a tool in the tool shed. I think if I had to say of what countries could do it or couldn't do it, it'd be, probably first world countries. I mean, if you have an economy that is similar to the United States, where you're willing to pay more for a good, superior product that's sustainably produced, and you have the income and the agreements to take care of that. I mean, if some, let's just say like Pakistan or something said, yeah, we're gonna take care of this nuclear waste, the same process the United States does. I don't know if I would believe them, but you have a developed country where they are already using nuclear power, or you have a country that is developed and doesn't have nuclear power, but they have the infrastructure to support safe waste disposal. But it's who am I?
Just letting you know, Pakistan has 4 nuclear
Oh, I know
facilities.
they do, but that's a whole separate thing that you're gonna look me in the eyes and tell me that they're disposing of their waste safely. Not that we are either, but
I want to be a glass half full, but I also want to be a realist. I'm gonna willing to say at least every country that has nuclear power plants. I don't think any country's perfect. I imagine even us here in the United States there's got to be some missteps, someone being lazy on the paperwork. But I want to play a little bit devil advocate of what you were saying, with only first world countries. If you're
well, okay, I want to preface this with yes, I start out with first world countries, but you don't have to have the facility in the like a developing country, but if you have it near it where the power goes to it, but it's in a safe place where it's taken care of and it's taken care of, then you can still have the benefits of nuclear power without having the nuclear power in hands that you don't trust. But they also don't want to police the world.
Okay, well, my devil advocate would be if I'm a country trying to become a second world country. So I was a third world country. We're trying to be in the upkeep. We're trying to get more businesses. We're starting to get more stability. Maybe try to get a nuclear plant to help power be more readily available for the people of said country. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think they'd have to have some kind of plan. Okay, so there's a company, I want to say it's called Deep Isolation, and they're one of the people who advocate for the drilling, the holes where you just put the material into it, and it's deep, and it's a relatively cost-effective way to store your nuclear material. If you have a place to store it, then yeah, then you should be able to do that. But you also have to be developed enough to where there's not like you're not being overthrown every second year by some warlord. Like there needs to be some stability when it comes to nuclear power. That's what I think. And I'm an American, so we have the benefit of living in the greatest country on the planet. I don't know if it's necessarily fair for us to say who should do what, but nuclear power is one of those things that has the chance to affect the entire world. And this is one of the very rare cases, like this and maybe 2 other things, where I'd say some kind of global ruling system about nuclear power wouldn't be the worst idea ever.
I agree with the stability. I think stability is probably the most important part for having nuclear power. But for the nuclear waste, maybe it's not storing, like you said, France can't really store it. Maybe not having the ability to store it is not the right checklist to have for if you should or should not have nuclear waste. Like you said, we could become a powerhouse and make it a business of collecting our people's nuclear waste and turning it into something else. Or maybe a country has to show that they're capable of turning the nuclear waste into having a safe response to their nuclear waste. I'd be okay with that, but I completely agree with the stability. Like you should not have had a new leader every 20 years that was not from a democratic process or some type of process, if that makes sense. Not a war-driven country.
Yeah, and as more nuclear waste gets out there, say the U.S. was the one to step up and say, "Hey, we'll store your waste for money," because there we go. There's if we're going to designate an area where no one goes, out in the middle of the desert, and we're willing to pay for it, even like Nevada right now, they don't want any nuclear waste. But if they got just a shit ton of money, that might change their mind. And it might change our mind about storing nuclear waste. If we're willing to denote an area of the Nevada desert or California desert or someplace that no one ever goes anyway, and to say, hey, this is where we're going to store nuclear material, this is the cost, and it might be a crazy cost, but
I mean,
for a price, I bet we'd be willing to do quite a bit.
To me, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Like, hey, China, for 1 gram, for $1,000 a day, we will we will store your nuclear waste. That's a lot of money. I mean, those are just ridiculous numbers, but that's a lot of money.
Yeah, those are super ridiculous numbers.
We gotta dream a little bit. But it is interesting. Do you remember the story of the Boy Scout who made a nuclear reactor in his shed?
I did not. You're going to have to refresh my memory.
So I believe this was in the 90s. This kid had to be 14, 15, maybe older, but he was in high school or middle school, one of the two. And he decided, I want to build a nuclear reactor. His parents thought he was kind of joking, kind of being weird. They thought their son wasn't the brightest. So he's like, yeah, sure, you can go do it in the shed. Well, turns out he actually did it. Not only did he grab a bunch of smoke detectors and then enrich the radioactive material to become usable, he talked with specialists, because this is way before cell phones and the I believe like the early ages of the internet. So he literally just called a college going, hey, I'm doing this and this and this. And the college thought that he was just a, grad student doing research. So they told him how to do it. It wasn't until later where the cops got called in to break up the shed of this Boy Scout who made a nuclear reactor in his shed. And rather than take everything to evidence, they had, go through right protocols and call stuff. Well, his mom, kind of worried, scared, because her son just got arrested for nuclear activity, just throws out the stuff. Just threw out everything. So all the radioactive waste just ended up in a landfill somewhere. And it's scary to think that people at home could make a nuclear reactor. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the youngest person to make a nuclear reactor, I think is 12 or 11. Smart kid. I think he's out of Utah. Was able to make a nuclear reactor with the help of his school, of course. That was his goal and ambition.
Every single part of that story was super American.
Every great business starts in the garage, and boy, did that! Oh man, start it. Could you imagine, like, hey mom, I'm back from football practice. I'm gonna go work on the nuclear reactor. Oh yeah, sure. Thinking her son's just, drinking beers and listening to AC/DC. No, he's enriching radioactive material to be usable to make a reactor.
Yeah, but if he had hooked that up and they never had to pay for power again, his mom would not have thrown that out. And his dad wouldn't have cared if he touched a thermostat.
Would you be okay if you had a nuclear reactor in your house? Say it was what's something that's risky but yet still kind of safe?
Most things.
All right, so say it was the same risk of buying an old house. Would you have a nuclear reactor power your house, a private one, not a power plant?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be all for that. I'd rather have my own power.
This is why we're friends. Just to have a nuclear reactor be your own, I am down for that.
Well, people keep talking about nuclear reactors getting smaller and smaller. Oh man, what was it? Were they talking about possibly having a nuclear reactor on every block?
I think it depends on whether we get fusion and fission both working. Because I believe fission is what we're using. I could be mistaken. It's either the word switched or not. But if we could use that nuclear waste, like we were talking about from TerraPower or from Transatomic, where they can use smaller facilities, that means there's less resources needed and less checklists to be needed to make a power plant. I would be okay with that if we could use the nuclear waste to have nuclear plants produce power for, say, major cities, and then have smaller areas where you don't have to run as many wires, have it run off nuclear waste. It seems like a biological ecosystem, Hawk eats mouse, mouse eats grass, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. And if you switch to nuclear, you could get rid of dams, help salmon population. People would like that.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about the benefits of using nuclear waste besides just removing the nuclear waste. Like having more small facilities, less coal plants, less natural gas needed. There's a lot of benefits to using nuclear waste as a fuel.
Yeah. And I think we should do a whole podcast on the pros and cons of various energy sources. But I don't want to get too deep into it now because I think that'd be a good one for later. But yeah, it could be a game changer, and we're just at the beginning of the nuclear technology, so I don't know where it's going to go, but we'll find out.
Absolutely. And I think we hit quite a bit of points. I am super excited to study that bacteria because that bacteria is very interesting to me. But for all those listening, nuclear waste might be in your backyard 3 miles underneath. You never know. It might be marked, might not be unmarked. And you should definitely check out our other podcasts, and please check us out on YouTube and Instagram at Backyard Philosophy. It really does help us out. Get subscribing, hitting the like button, just listening to our videos wherever you can. It really does mean a lot.
Yeah, this isn't your oh my gosh, this isn't your first podcast, people. You know the drill.
Nick, you're as bad as me. I flub my words all the time. How much bourbon have you been drinking?
I'm at about 4 to 5 fingers right now.
Oh, that's a good amount. Good amount. Well, I think that's a good stopping point. I want to say thank you all for listening, and Nick, I want to say thank you for teaching me something. Did not know that nuclear waste is such a new science that has new possibilities of things I didn't even think we could do with nuclear waste.
No, I mean it's every episode I learned so many new things. This is crazy, but yeah, and I think in probably 2 years we could be able to do a whole new podcast with so many new possibilities. It's crazy how fast it seems like this technology is coming.
I would say we definitely made it if we get a nuclear physicist or nuclear engineer on the podcast.
Yeah, I think we for sure would have made that. That'd be insane, which would be down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say again, thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We rarely finish a podcast without missing a point we wanted to bring up, so let us know what we forgot. And if you have a topic you want us to talk about, let us know at Backyard Philosophy on Instagram and Backyard Philosophy Podcast on Facebook.